Oh.
Yeah, okay, we should be recording now.
Great.
And we'll start in just a couple minutes. And then before we close out, one of us or both of us can work together to save the chat and then the recording.
Yeah. Yeah, we still have another minute, but welcome to those who are already with us. Okay, I think it's time, so I'm just gonna get us started right on the clock. My name is Yola Jacobs. I'm an assistant professor of German studies at the University of Arizona, and I'm the co-founder and facilitator of the Literary and Cultural Plan Studies Network that is partnering with this conference. I'm gonna put the link in the chat just in case anyone's interested in those resources. And yeah, welcome to this panel. We're really excited to have you here. I'm handing it over to my co-moderator for a couple of technical announcements first.
Okay, great. Thank you, Yoela. My name is Walter Furness. I'm a doctoral student at Texas State University, and I'm in the geography department, but very interested in all of these great talks we have today. Just a couple of notes for those who are joining. Please use the Q&A function to leave questions for our speaker, and I'll be working on moderating that and keeping an eye on it. We will have hopefully I think we'll definitely have some time at the end for questions. And so the chat function is also available, but it's a little more manageable if we use the Q&A. So please do that. This runs this session until 3:40, depending on your time zone. It's 45 minutes. And yeah, if you have any tech questions along the way, you can send me a chat, and I'll try to do my best to help out.
Yeah, and I'm very happy to welcome Vicente to our to this talk today. He is a postdoctoral fellow at the Rotman Institute of Philosophy at Western University in Canada, and he works on the philosophy of cognitive science and ecological psychology. And I can't wait to hear what he has to tell us today. So please take it away.
Thank you, Joella. Thank you, Walter, too. I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share the scene, and I'm going to maximize my slides. So I assume you are seeing them well. Okay. So I'm going to be talking about being there, which is a Heideggerian joke I make quite often. But my main aim here is to talk about plants and how they move, I say, in a scientific world, because in this new way in which we can be with plants, one of the realms is the kind of science we do, right? So during this talk, I'm going to be try to propose a new science of plant behavior. And I actually only want to make one point, which is that if we want to understand plant behavior, we have to start with plant behavior. And this is pretty much the spoiler of my whole talk. I'm just going to be giving you details on why I think that and what that means. So I'm going to talk a little bit first about what plant behavior is, and I'm going to provide some examples. And after that, I'm going to provide what I want to name as a principle for the study, for the science of plant behavior. And at the end, I'm going to talk a little bit about plant sentience, which is a little bit more spooky topic. I won't say too much about it, but I will say some things. And at the end, I hopefully have a couple of take-home messages to go with. So let me start telling you a little bit about uh, that to have a better way to do science with plants is in itself part of the aims of this whole conference, right? If we are looking for a new way of being with plants, well, we are with plants in many different ways, and one of them is that we study them, we try to understand how they grow, their ecosystems, etc. Right? So I think that if we want to have a better way, I would say, but at least one way to do science with plants, there's only one starting point, and it's actually a very simple starting point, as I've said right before, which is that to do science with plants, we have to understand first plant behavior, and this should be our starting point. Um, and after that, we can talk about how plant genetics influence the behavior, how physiology influence that specific behavior, and then we can even talk about other things like plant ethics or plant intelligence even. But I want to say that the natural way to study scientifically anything is to first observe what is going on and then try to find the mechanism or mechanisms that make it possible. So if you let me put it in a different way, I don't think there's any way that we can go from knowing the genes of plants to know plant mutation, for instance. We first need a good description of what plant mutation is, how it develops in time, and then we can find the contributions of genes and other mechanisms to plant mutation. So, a compatible but different way to say this, to say the thing I'm trying to claim here, is that the wrong strategy is to say something like plants lack X, whatever thing, so we don't even need to study them in that way. A typical example of this, let's say I'm half a philosopher, half a cognitive scientist. The typical example that I can come up with is brains are needed for cognition. Plants have no brain, therefore no cognition. So we don't even really need to study the behaviors of plants to see whether they are cognitive or not, right? We have an a priori answer. As they have no brains, it is impossible that their behaviors are cognitive in any sense. Well, I think this is actually a purely theoretical and a bad argument at the same time. Uh, it's an easy one because you don't have to work then. I mean, you have your answer. You don't even need to observe plants, right? You already know about them. Well, I'm trying to propose the opposite, that let's first see how complex plant behavior are, and then we can see whether they need brains or not, right? And so this is my starting point. I think you can never go from, or let me put it better than, I think it is very difficult to go from a supposed mechanism to a behavior. I think it's better to first understand the nuances of a behavior and then try to find what kind of mechanism is able to implement it. So this is what I plan to do here. And this is actually, when I've done plant science, is what I've been trying to do. So I'm going to show you some behaviors, and I'm going to tell you how I try to not only myself, how we have tried to study them. So one very famous example are Novoplansky's experiments on root communication. Here is a kind of complicated experimental setup, but I think I'm going to be able to explain it easily. You see a few plants, right, and a few pots. The blue cylinders there are pots, and the orange one too, right? So what you have here is that an orange pot with the depth there, which is a pot for a plant with some stressful condition, like let's say some lack of water or lack of minerals, etc. Right? So you plant a plant in that one, but if you are able to see it, there are like half of the roots of that plant go to the, let's call it the evil pot, and the other half go to the other pot, right? So the plant is planted in two pots, and the next plant shares one good pot with the first plant and another pot with other plants. So all of them are planted there, but there's only one plant that actually has roots in the evil pot, right? So then we know that the evil pot has some kind of a stressful condition for the plant. Again, lack of water, etc. And there's a way to measure what we could call stress in plants. And it's when plants are stressed, their stomas, which are these little pictures that you have at the bottom there, are closed. Because by closing them, they are able to maintain water best and that stuff. And when they are non-stressed, these stomas are open. Well, there's a very interesting phenomenon here, is that the four plants to the right, the ones that share a pot with the plant that is in the evil pot, they all are stressed. So all their stomas are closed. But it is interesting that all of them are sad. So all of them are stressed, even those that have no connection at all with the evil pot and no direct connection to the plant that is potted in the evil pot, right? Even the far right plant that only shares one pot with a different plant closes the stomas, as if the plant that has a part in the evil pot is telling them, hey, something is something is wrong here, so get ready, right? And we think that it's a form of root communication because there are other four plants that are potted in their own pots, and they are happy. So these other four plants are in the same room and they are happy plants. So it seems that there's no chemicals at the level of the air that is communicating the stress. But this is a quite interesting example of a complex behavior in plants. Is this a cognitive one? We don't know, but this is an interesting one, right? Another very famous one is the experiments by Apple and Cockcroft. They basically deceived a plant to feel the kind of vibration the plant feels when it's eaten by some bug, some caterpillar, and the plant only with the vibration, I mean, only, let's say, with the same sound made, the plant reacts as if it is eaten, although it is not. So it seems like the plant is reacting to a dangerous stimulation, although the dangerous event that accompanies that stimulation usually is not there. So this can be seen as a kind of fight or fly in the plant, but the problem is that plants cannot fly. So they need to deal with threats in a different way. So these are two, both of them are well-known phenomenons, well-known behaviors that seems to be complex enough in plants. But the one I've been working most with is in plant movement, actually. All plants move, and many of them move a lot, like a real lot. And nobody doubts that. Plants move a lot. The question, though, is how can we understand the movement? And in order to try to explain this in a simple way, I'm going to give you an example. We usually classify movement in general in two different ways, like falling metal balls or like walking metal heads. There are these two kinds of things. The falling metal balls are the kind of physical movement that we understand as purely following the laws of physics, purely reactive and non-intelligent. A metal head walking on a street, we take it to be the product of a cognitive organism that has a name, that goes to some place, etc. So these are the two kinds of movement we can think of. Just to put an example, if you remember the famous myth, because it's more of a myth than other thing, that Galileo went up to Pisa's tower with two balls, similar shape but different density, to let them fall down and see which one falls better, to try to disprove Aristotle, blah, 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 right? So beyond the myth itself, if in that picture this person there is Galileo, and he drops the ball, what's the path you expect the ball to follow? I think, or I'm quite sure that you expect that the ball is going to do something like that, right? And if Galileo comes down, picks the ball again, goes up again and throws the ball in the exact same point, you expect the ball to do the same thing. And if Galileo comes back down again and up and throws the ball from the same point, you expect the same path. And even if it is not, and even if the ball is not dropped from the exact same point, you expect that it's going to be a parallel path, right? But you don't expect that the path of the ball is going to dramatically change or to change by any kind of aim, right? You expect that the ball is going to follow what we can call the path of least action, you know, the most straight forward way to follow there. Think about, though, of a metalhead like me, who is living in a church there in the picture, who wants to go to his job that is in the Rodman Institute, which is up there, right? And so I'm going to walk one day there, right? From my place, from one street, another street. The second day, I'm going to kind of follow a similar path, but not exactly the same one, right? You don't expect that I'm going to follow exactly the same path. It's going to be somehow a reliable path, somehow a regular path, but it's going to include some variability, even if the path is the same one, right? The third day, yeah, similar path, not exactly the same one, but someday, for instance, I might want to cut my hair, which, by the way, will never happen. I might want to cut my hair before I get to the Rodman Institute. So I'm going to stop first in the barber shop, and then maybe I go to the other shop to get some lunch, and then to the Rodman Institute. So here the path is still regular in some sense, right? I still go from the church to my job, but there are like two other factors in my environment that had made my path to change a little bit, right? And I didn't really like the haircut, so I came back, and then still, and I can even go through the other side someday. So the point here is that the ball, which is a physical movement that we consider non-intelligent, one of the main features is that it's not only regular, but under the same conditions is invariable, right? It's always the same path. One of the main signatures of what we take to be a control intelligent movement, or of the kind of movement that the biological cognitive system does, is that it still is regular with respect to some aspects of the environment, like my job or the barber shop, but you expect that in this regularity you will always find variability. Or if you want to put it in a different way, cognitive behavior, cognitive movement changes to remain the same, constantly changes to remain the same, right? So we can have a question. Is plant movement more similar to the metal ball falling, or what we have characterized as not intelligent, or more similar to the metal head walking? Why? Because if we understand the behavior of the plant deeply, then we can look what other factors, whether physiological or genetic or etc., affect that behavior. Um, and this is actually what we did in a recent experiment that we published last year in scientific reports. We studied plant nutation, and you may ask, what is plant nutation? Well, it's a kind of quasi-circular or quasi-elliptical movement that if not all, many plants exhibit, and especially climbing beings seems to use it to explore their environment, to find a support to climb and then grow. So let me show you what kind of movement we were um, checking. What you are seeing here is hopefully is a video. In the center of it, you see a climbing being, and it's already moving around, right? This is a time lapse, so we took a picture every minute, and then we put it all together, and we have two cameras, zenithal one, lateral one. So the plant in the two sides is the same plant. So what you can see, especially in the zenithal view at the left of the video, is that at some point the plant, before touches the pole, is going to change the behavior. And you can see how it even seems that the plant is trying to fish the pole there, right? It's not, right? It looks very, very brutal, actually, like how the plant seems to try to get to the pole, and at the end it gets there, right? So we wanted to understand whether plant nutation, whether this kind of movement is more like hardwired, purely physical thing, or it has some of this variability to remain the same that is the typical of the cognitive movements. So what we did is to have a booth in which we put a plant and a pole near to it, and we had a light on it and a camera on top of it, right, to control the to be able to record the plant and to be able to study the movement. We put 10 plants in this kind of booth with a pole, and 10 plants in the similar in an indistinguishable booth without a pole. And we put them pairs of plants, one with pole and one without pole, at the same time, in the same place, with the same light, etc. With the same humidity and blah blah. So we wanted to see whether the pole affected the movement of the plant, like the barber shop affected my movement when I went to my job. So we recorded the 10 pairs of plants and digitalized the movement there and did a lot of math that I'm not going to tell here. We can talk about it. They are in our paper. And the answer was that actually the movement of the climbing beam in this situation is less similar to the falling ball and more similar to the metal head that walks in the street. The paper in which you can read this experiment is down here in the slide. Raja, Silva, Holgumi, and Calvo, the dynamics of plant nutation. But what our study has shown is that it seems that the movement of nutation in climbing beams is more similar to the control movement of a cognitive system engaging with its environment than the non-control movement of a falling ball. One question here could be something like, does it mean that plants are cognitive systems? I don't know. I think nobody knows. But this is an example of before we go to try to do any other kind of hypothesis regarding other levels of organization in plants like genetics, etc., we try to have a detailed, careful understanding of how the movement works, and then we might understand the mechanism of it. So I think this experiment is a clear example of the steps that I'm trying to vindicate here, right? That the steps are: first, observe the phenomenon, observe movement itself, then try to do science to understand the phenomenon itself, and then you likely have to do more science to gather conclusions for the phenomenon. But if you, for instance, and just to use this as an example again, if you don't understand plant nutation well, there's no way that you are going to find the mechanism of plant nutation. You need first to understand what the hell is going on there, and then you probably can understand the mechanism. So to some extent, to sum up, the main point of what I want to claim here is this principle for a science of plant behavior. The first is start with the plant. Don't start with your science. Start with the plant, observing the plant, looking at the plant. We have a great example in Darwin. He was sat in front of plants, and without time lapse like us, without fancy computer, he sat there for hours to try to understand how they moved, right? Then use proper tools, and this is important. In most literature on plant nutation, on the kind of behavior I've shown here, you see things like nutation is a circular movement of plants, and that's just not true. That's a strong simplification done with experiments that doesn't respect the ecological environment of the plant. So do not aim for simplicity of your explanation. Aim for a good description. This means that you probably have to adapt your lab to the conditions in which the plants exhibit this behavior, right? And this requires work, but provides better ecological validity. And finally, be careful with the concepts. We don't need to say that plants are intelligent to understand how they move. Maybe by studying how they move, we can end up claiming something about their intelligence, but we don't need them, right? And of course, once we know how they move, we will have plenty to explore in terms of genetics, physiology, ethics, etc. So to end up with this part of the talk, and basically with the talk, I want to echo a sentence by cognitive psychologist Edward C. Tolman. It's a sentence that was said in 1958. The sentence says, psychology cannot be explained by a physiology until one has a psychology to explain. This sentence is said in the context of whether we need psychology in neuroscience or only neuroscience, which in this case is neurophysiology, is able to explain anything. And what Tolman was saying there is that for neurophysiology to be able to explain psychological events, we first need a good description of psychological events. We need first to understand, for instance, what is the emotion of happiness, to understand what's the role of the brain in that emotion. But if we don't understand what the emotion of happiness is as a psychological event, we have no way to understand what the role of the brain is, right? So I just want to paraphrase Tolman and say, a plant behavior cannot be explained by a physiology until one has a plant behavior to explain. And this kind of summarizes my point here. It's like, look at the plant, look what they do, try to understand. And then I'm sure we have many other scientific concepts and tools to deal with it. So just one more word here, because I haven't said anything about consciousness, and consciousness is a hot topic, as we have been talking about. So someone may ask, but Vicente, what about plant consciousness and sentience? And I can only say two things. The first, that we don't know. Really, we don't know. We just published a special issue of the Journal of Consciousness Studies on Plant Sentience with a lot of biologists, psychologists, and philosophers talking about it. But we really don't know it, and it's likely that if we end up proving that plant has some kind of sentience or consciousness, it is going to be something different, or we should expect something different from our own. Due to the different kind of organisms we are. So, just two things. We need a science of plant behavior that takes account the phenomenon itself, and we need probably less grand claims and a little bit more of science. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that great presentation. We have definitely lots of time for Q&A, and we have a few questions in the Q&A to get us started. I'll just go ahead and read the first one, but to anyone attending, please feel free to add to the Q&A. So one attendee said, what if we plant some plants in pots, like in the case with the evil pot, but without the evil pot? So the plants would share pots, but no evil pot. Would they be happy? What if they just don't like sharing pots?
I mean, that's a possibility, that they don't like to share pots. It's a little bit strange, because generally plants share land, right? If you don't have pots, you just plant, and you go to whatever place where plants are, they share a space. So it would be surprising that all plants don't like to share space. It is possible that, and you can see also this, that some plants are not well planted with other plants, right? But this is a case by case thing, right? More generally, it is possible. I mean, I'm sure that if plants communicate, like in the case of that experiment, they communicate both evil and good things, right? In this specific case, the the evil part helps because give us a way to look at that communication, right? It's not that when you put an evil pot, it's not because you want to torture the plant. It's more because it is the factor that allow us to look whether there is communication or not in an experiment without a changing condition of that kind. They might be still communicating, but we have no way to compare it to a different situation, right? That's the thing.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll read the next question that we have, which is from Noelle, and she's asking, in your research, did you only use vines?
Yes, I mean, I work in all this work with plants. I'm an external collaborator of Mint Lab. Mint Lab is a lab at the University of Murcia in Spain. It's actually the place I'm from, and a different speaker, actually, I don't know where he talks, but Paco Galvo, who is a speaker here, is the leader of the lab, and they work with more things. But in my specific work, I only work with climbing beans, actually. This paper, the paper I've been presenting, is conceived as a standard methodology to study nutation in many different plants. But yeah, I mean, there's no specific reason why I work with vines and not other kinds of plants. I mean, the reasons are scientific and are two, let's say. One, there's enough literature on vines that we can use to generate our own experiment. And two, from when actually Paco started thinking on do this kind of study until we had the proper means to have a controlled environment to do it. You know, the boots with the temperature, the light. You know, all the things that you need to have a properly controlled experiment. Well, I think we started thinking about this in like 2014, and we published the experiment in late 2020. So it was 6 years of work just to have everything for not only for vines in general, you know, like for this for 2 or 3 species of climbing beans, right? 2 or 3 genotypes. So yeah. That's why it requires a lot of work. So I wish we could do it with many other plants, right? But yeah, we only have one life and we need to sleep. So
Right. Yeah, very interesting. Perhaps somewhat related to this, there's another question from Ian who says, you know, what specific technology for growth measurement do you think holds the most promise for future understanding? Perhaps it could be broadened even just to think about, based on your experiences with the climbing bean, you know, what are some ways that we can aim for that description that you're advocating for?
yeah, this is actually a very good question, and the answer is not completely clear. First, because we don't know too much. I would say that I don't know if a specific technology, although we can talk a little bit about that too, but what we need first, and foremost is to balance the kind of situation that people need to balance in, for instance, in the study of animals too, and that I need to balance when I do standard cognitive science with human beings, right? Which is, we need our experimental setup to be controlled enough as we are sure that what we measure is what we need to be measuring, but at the same time we need that the experimental setup is similar enough to the natural setup, so we are not disturbing the behavior itself, right? So we need what it is called ecological validity, right? That our experimental setup is similar enough to the natural one as to capture the natural movement of plants, that we are not disturbing it with weird lights or with too cold or too warm and that kind of thing. And this in itself requires a lot of technological adjustments. And actually, the to the best of my knowledge, and I I might not to be saying this, but the recording booths we have right now are, I think, the best ones to record this in the world, for sure, right? They are thought as to have a natural environment. Actually, we have even have lights to have our day and night cycle for all the plants that now mimic the dawn and the sunset. So try to do the environment as similar as the real one as we can, and this in itself is a lot of technological challenges are there, right? There are lots of technological challenges, and pretty much about everything. So how you pot the plants, how they grow, they need to grow similar, because if you need to compare them, they have to be similar in some sense, blah blah. There are other technological stuff. It seems to me that at least for the kind of movement we do, time lapse is the thing that we can do best, right? Uh, there's there's other things, like from the time lapse to the coding. There's a step there, like in which we measure the tip of the vine, right? In every shot we have, in every picture, and the way you select in which pixel the tip is challenging in itself. We are exploring having some form of machine learning, deep learning algorithm that is able to treat the picture and that stuff. So yeah, I think that having cool environments, the one I think we have, being very, very careful with our recording and with our coding technology is the way to go. The answer, like which one is going to be the best one, we are still exploring. We are still trying to know.
This is really fascinating. We currently don't have another question in the Q&A, so maybe I might ask one, unless someone else hits enter right now and tells us that they're in the process of typing, which would be fine. So I find it really interesting that you're describing all these environments that you're creating, that you're recreating, right, as close as possible to what it would be in nature. And I was earlier, Paco gave his talk earlier, and I was there, and there was a bit of a discussion or a question about I would rephrase it as sort of the question between the natural and the artificial in a context like that. Like, can the lab actually produce these kinds of conditions? Of course, the lab, I mean, an experimental setup has to fulfill certain requirements that maybe you couldn't achieve outside. But what do we do with that kind of conflict, perhaps? Because you said go to the plants first, and if I take you literally, then taking the plant into the lab might not be going to the plant first. I don't know. Maybe as a little bit of a provocation.
Oh yeah, no, it's sure. I know Paco is working on that and trying to put recording booths in the jungle, and that's a thing in itself. But it's actually a very good question that that I mean we really don't know how to solve, and the thing is that we are facing this question now because we are uh, consciously trying to study behavior in plants. And then when you do that too, but this is a super old question, for instance, in animal ethology. You have fights between people that study, for instance, apes in the lab, and people like Louis Barrett that go to the jungle and live with apes for months, right? Um, Sometimes you see how the lab people say, oh, the field people have described that monkeys or apes do this and this and this, but then we pick them up, put them in the lab, and they don't exhibit that behavior anymore. So the field people are just doing wishful thinking, and the field people say no, we have seen this. The problem is that of course you move the ape to a complete alien environment and some of the behavior are disrupted, and you should actually expect that. And they have, like, since Morgan Cannon at the beginning of the 20th century, they are arguing about it, and there's no solution now. I tend to think, and my 50% philosopher part tends to think that there's no clear solution to this thing, right? The best thing we can do, I'm more, in this case, I'm more a lab than a field guy in this thing. I'm open to go to the field. So if someone wants to invite me 6 months to a cool place to study plants, cool, right? But right now I'm more a lab guy. So acknowledging that we are not going to be able to mimic it, we still can try to do our best to have a good environment. But yeah, if someone says, but this is not the real thing, I would say you are right, but this is the best we've been able to do.
Great. Yeah, that sounds like an honest answer to me and a good ending place for now. Vicente, thank you so much for this presentation, for sharing your work with us.
Thank you for inviting me.
All right, and I'm going to go ahead and end the recording here.